Used clubs that were hardly more than a crude stick with heads carved of blackthorn, beech, apple, or pearwood. They hit a white painted ball called a feathery, a tightly sewn leather pouch crammed full with boiled feathers that rarely lasted more than a few rounds.
It took a man half a day to make a feather ball, so they cost more than a club. A good feather ball on a good day would maybe go 150 yards. If it was wet and you hit them with an iron, they wouldn't last very long at all. 2 or 3 holes at the most.
Nevertheless, the game soon became so popular that it interfered with the practice of archery, Scotland's primary defense. Fearing for the safety of his kingdom, King James II outlawed the game in 1457, declaring that golf be utterly cried down and not used. The decree didn't stick. In fact, Mary Queen of Scots herself became an avid golfer. She had young French students carry her clubs, nicknaming them Les Cadets, which eventually evolved into the word caddies. A bit fanatical both on and off the course, she was back on the links just 6 days after the brutal murder of her husband.
The following Sunday, John Knox, the great Presbyterian preacher, denounced her in St. Giles Cathedral. He said he did not think that 6 days was a respectable interval. He thought it should have been at least a week.
The courses in Mary's day were little more than fields that had been trampled and trimmed by sheep and outfitted with a few well-placed holes. But like the land upon which the shepherds of St. Andrews grazed their sheep and smacked their crude leather balls, the game itself was soon taken over by the upper class. As more landed gentry and members of royalty took up the game, it was only fitting that more sophisticated courses be built. In 1784, just such a course opened. It was called the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews. More than merely a course, it was to become the model upon which all subsequent golf clubs were based.
I've been pretty much a traditionalist all my life. I sort of love the traditions of the game and the traditions of different things. So when I got to St. Andrews, I saw that, this is where the game started, and this old golf course that is so ugly and looks so bad, and it turns out to be so beautiful and so great. I started liking it, I started loving it, I started liking what happens there and what you have to do and how you have to play. And a golf course that looks so simple is so complicated. I mean, everything just says golf.
The original links at St. Andrews ran along a narrow spit of undulating land, laced by a laconic rivulet called the Schuylkill Burn. It was here that many of the game's traditions were born. Players played 18 holes, but with one major difference. The original course had only 9 holes, so players played 9 holes out and 9 holes in, the same 9 holes. They shared the fairways and greens in both directions.
This led to disputes and conflicts as the game got more popular, so they hit on the bright idea of simply putting 2 holes on each green. So then you develop these, as we now have them, these very, very large, monstrous double greens where you can have a putt of up to 100 yards.
From this chaos, some of the sport's polite courtesies emerged. Yelling 4, marking your ball, and on rare occasions, waving a group through. To provide for the comfort of its elite members, in 1854, the Royal and Ancient Course, or the R&A as it came to be called, added a massive stone clubhouse on a spectacular crag overlooking the North Sea. A place to store their clubs and warm themselves with a taste of Scotch whiskey, a meal and a pint of ale, all surrounded by good company. Women were not allowed in, nor were caddies, who by that time had become an established part of the game. Their duties of carrying and cleaning members' clubs and retrieving errant golf balls were taken seriously by the St. Andrews members. Caddies were under strict orders at all times to mind their manners, and above all, stay sober.
Some of the early caddy regulations are absolutely draconian. They could be banned from caddying for an entire year if they didn't perform properly. And at times they introduced a school for them, and they were encouraged, shall we say, in various ways to go to this school and get some learning. And they were told that they had to appear sober, they had to appear clean and tidy, and if they weren't, they were thrown off the course and not allowed to caddy.
Since they weren't allowed in the clubhouse, the caddies ended up spending most of their time out on the links. It paid off. The St. Andrews caddies soon became the game's best players, and eventually the first professionals.
Gentlemen would have a golfer who they would back in big money matches against other golfers who were also being backed by another gentleman. The golfers eventually began to make far more money at this sort of exercise than they did from caddying.
Among the best of golf's new professionals was the legendary Tom Morris. In the late 19th century, Morris both managed and redesigned the course at St. Andrews. From his shop, across from the course, he also made many of the members' clubs. Morris became immensely popular in Scotland, winning a host of R&A's tournaments, including one that evolved into the British Open. He dominated play, winning 4 Opens in the 1860s. But Morris's success on the course certainly wasn't due to his putting. He was a notoriously bad putter. He once received a letter addressed simply to the misser of short putts. But it wasn't trophies or clubs or course designs that immortalized him. It was a round piece of African rubber. In the late 1840s, a Scottish minister and avid golfer named Reverend Patterson fashioned a ball out of some packing material called gutta percha. He showed the new ball to old Tom Morris, who was impressed. Traditionalists scoffed at the new ball, but its superiority over the feather ball and old Tom Morris's convincing demonstrations soon converted the naysayers. The gutta percha ball took over.
The great advantage was that it was cheap and durable, and everybody could play. And if there were only 15 golf courses in 1850, by 1900 there were 2,300 golf courses all over the world, and it was the gutta ball that did it.
In the mid-1800s, America was too busy to care much about something as trivial as hitting a rubber ball around with a stick. More pressing issues like Civil War and the Industrial Revolution didn't leave much room for leisure time. Only a handful of people had ever heard of golf, let alone played it. Newly elected President Ulysses Grant's reaction to an early exhibition of golf was typical of the nation's. "Looks like an excellent exercise," he remarked, "but what's a little white ball for?" As the Industrial Revolution took hold in America's northeastern cities, it created great wealth among the barons of business and titans of Wall Street. And slowly a leisure class began to emerge. To keep themselves occupied at posh new resorts like the Breakers and the Biltmore, America's new gentry played games like lawn tennis, polo, bicycling, and soon, golf. In 1888, an immigrant Scotsman named John Reed built a crude 3-hole golf course in a cow pasture outside New York. Little did Reed know he would eventually become known as the father of American golf.
On Washington's birthday in 1888, it was an unusually mild day, and they played in a cow pasture near his house in Yonkers. That was the first game of golf in America. One of the early locations of the club was in Yonkers, and it was revolved around a number of apple trees, one of which was right near the home hole. And the club members used that as sort of their first initial clubhouse. They would hang their jackets on the limbs of the trees. They would put little wicker baskets for their scotch to hang in it, so that as they went by the tree each time they could take a little nip. And they became known then as the Apple Tree Gang.
The Apple Tree Gang named their club St. Andrews, but it was a far cry from its namesake back in Reed's homeland. There were few players, and equipment was scarce.
It was pretty rudimentary stuff. I mean, the caddies carried the clubs loosely under their arms. They played with wooden shafted clubs and gutta percha balls, and a good drive was 180 yards.
The well-equipped player of the 1890s could purchase a basic set of 6 clubs, 3 woods and 3 irons, for around $16 a set. But more specialized clubs often came in handy as well.
This is a rubber. If the ball landed in a rut, they used this small club that was lofted and struck the ball in hopes of getting it out of the wagon rut.
In Scotland, a gentleman would never be caught on the links without the standard outfit. Tweed coat, vest, tie, stiff long pants, and sturdy dress shoes. But in America, perhaps due to America's more informal nature, or a player's desire to get a full backswing, golfers shed the topcoat and vest to don what would become traditional golf attire of sweater, tie, and baggy knickers. Among those likely to be seen in such attire at the new St. Andrews course was steel magnate Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie had learned the game as a youth in Scotland, calling it an indispensable adjunct to high civilization. In 1890, Carnegie joined St. Andrews and personally signed a $50,000 mortgage to build a clubhouse.
Andrew Carnegie was an avid golfer. He wasn't a particularly great golfer, but he was a very avid golfer. And he was from the same town in Scotland, Dunfermline, that John Reed was. John Reed was the founder of this club. When the club needed a little money, he was able to arrange financing for them, let's put it that way.
Though Carnegie wasn't a great golfer, he was a passionate one, even obsessive. On the day he sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan for $250 million, a friend congratulated him on his great day. Yes, he replied excitedly, I parred the fifth hole for the very first time, ignoring the fact that he had made one of the biggest financial deals in American history. Oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller was just as passionate about the game as Carnegie. He built a private 9-hole course at his estate. As for his play, Rockefeller wasn't any better than Carnegie. Among his problems was an inability to keep his right foot planted on his backswing. His solution? He ordered his caddy to hold it down with a croquet wicket. Rockefeller also had trouble keeping his head down as he swung. But for the richest man in America, this too was easily solved. He hired a boy to march the course with him and whisper, keep your head down, sir.
When the Rockefellers and the Carnegies played each other, sometimes their bets were very small, but it was a gentleman's game. To this day, when men play, the bets are customarily very small. It's the thrill of the competition. And these men had as much money as they possibly ever could want, but it was the betting added to the competition, and it was the competition that they enjoyed.
Yeah, John D. Rockefeller, he was well remembered around here for taking his bets very seriously. And he was in the midst of a major bet for $3.50 with one of his partners, and he didn't have the right club in his bag. So he paid his caddy $5 to run back to the rail car and get his other clubs. So John got his correct club. It only cost him $5 to win his $3.50 bet.
In 1887, the Philadelphia Times noted that golf was a most aristocratic exercise. For no man can play who has not a servant at his hand to carry and assist him. The paper was right. Golf's appeal was largely among the super rich of the day. And one of the richest of all soon built a course and clubhouse that would all but eclipse those that had come before. William K. Vanderbilt was heir to the huge Vanderbilt fortune and de facto poster boy for the leisure class. In 1892, Vanderbilt and several other wealthy New Yorkers hired Scotsman Willie Davis to design a course in the sandy hills of eastern Long Island, summer playground of the well-to-do. Acquiring the land from the Shinnecock Indians, they employed 150 laborers to transform once coastal scrubland into the course they named Shinnecock Hills. When it was completed, it was by far the most sophisticated golf club in America. The roughs were filled with natural boulders, gullies, and blueberry bushes. Old Indian mounds were left as bunkers, and like the links in Scotland, the sandy hills of Shinnecock were almost constantly swept by the sea winds from the Atlantic.
This course is, I guess, as close as you can come to a Scottish links course, in this country. We have water on both sides, which creates the winds, and with sandy soil, very sandy soil, and a lot of grassland.
But the goal of building Shinnecock Hills was more than having a great golf course. Vanderbilt and his partners wanted an exclusive club, a place where the richest of the rich could socialize in luxurious surroundings, away from the endless gaze and constant din of the commoners. They turned to world-famous architect Stanford White to create such a place. It was the nation's first real clubhouse. Shinnecock Hills quickly became a social center for its elite members, where they dined, partied, and staged lavish balls. Arriving at Shinnecock was as much of an event as playing the course. Caddies met members at the railway station to pick up their bags and steer them to ornate carriages, complete with coachmen and grooms.
club sprang up because men who had the same passion for golf would like to get together with friends who were their peers and social equals. You didn't have to play with the hoi polloi if you were a member of a club. Not that you had to be even a good golfer or tennis player. It was a social statement, and so it attracted affluent people.
Soon other exclusive courses like Shinnecock began springing up around the country. They were called country clubs. Country club membership was almost exclusively white and male, modeled after British men's clubs. Women were generally excluded, as were blacks and Jews. New members were carefully screened and elected by existing members. At luxurious clubs like the Jekyll Island Club, sports had always been key, especially riding, hunting, and fishing. But for most country clubs, golf soon became the dominant activity. The New York Times called golf a fad in the fickle minds of the rich. But with the dawn of the 20th century, it was beginning to catch on as a sport, too. And soon, American ingenuity and its competitive spirit would combine to create an explosion in popularity. In the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had made America one of the world's richest countries. With more time and money on their hands, America's leisure class hit the links with increased fervor. And sports like baseball and boxing captured headlines. As the popularity of golf in America grew, Americans couldn't resist tinkering with it. Innovations like automobiles, light bulbs, and indoor plumbing made Americans feel like anything could be improved upon with a little American ingenuity. Golf was no exception. In 1896, an avid golfer named Colburn Haskell stopped off at the B.F. Goodrich Company in Cleveland to meet a friend for an afternoon round. While waiting, Haskell began to toy with some rubber thread he found discarded in the company lab. Winding it into a ball, Haskell marveled at its lively bounce and jokingly wondered what it would be like to tee off with such a ball. Haskell's joke became a radical new golf ball. With a core of solid rubber overlaid with a tension-wound rubber thread, the Haskell ball could soar higher and farther than any in history.
It was a much nicer ball to hit. It wasn't nearly so hard and stony as the gutter ball, but it was a bouncy ball, so they began to put markings on the face of clubs to put a bit of spin on the ball and stop it.
The impact of the new ball was stunning. The pleasure of the long hit had always been part of the fascination of golf, and Haskell's ball made that possible for more people. Clubs, too, soon received a healthy dose of American innovation, as new materials and manufacturing techniques added to the club's accuracy and consistency. Despite the improvements, the old Scottish names still held forth. The Brassie was similar to today's number 2 wood. It took its name from the brass plate that protected the bottom of the club. Due to its deep, lofted face, the 3 wood was known as a spoon. The number 1 iron, or driving iron, was called a cleek. Mashies were the middle irons. The 8 was a pitching niblick. The 9 was called a pure niblick. The jigger was used for shots around the green, the baffy when the ball found the thick rough. Back then, there was no 14 club limit, and some golfers carried as many as 30 in their bag. Whether it was because of the fanciful names or the craftsmanship of the smooth hickory shafts, the clubs of the early 1900s offered something that today's mass-produced, high-tech marvels can't match: personality. A player came to think of his club as a true friend. When he made a good shot, his dear trusted niblick shared the glory. If he sliced into the pond, that damn niblick took the blame.
I've still got a bunch at home in the bag, and you put it down and you think, wow, how the hell do we use that? And you could never get two the same. You had your favourite one, and if you bust that, you're in serious trouble. I mean, there was only a few guys very privileged to have 20 drivers made exactly the same. But even then they wouldn't be exactly the same because because it's a natural product.
When I think about the spirit of the game, I suppose that even though we thrive on modern equipment and all that, it was just as much fun with the old equipment.
And there was one more innovation to the game in the 1900s, one that remains virtually unchanged today: the invention of the wooden golf tee. For nearly 4 centuries, golfers made their own tees with sand and a bucket of water provided by the course.
They used the method of teeing the ball up was with some water and some sand. They had a bucket, 2 buckets on each tee, and you mixed the water and the sand, and you took your fingers and you pinched the tee to the height that you desired the ball to be placed at.
As equipment improved, scores began to drop. The bogey, which was once the standard of the game, became par, the number of hits it should take a golfer to play a hole. Bogey was relegated to 1 over par. 1 stroke under par was called a birdie, allegedly after a golfer named George Crump hit a bird in mid-flight, which caused his ball to drop next to the hole. 2 under par was considered a noble birdie indeed, so the term eagle evolved. Extremely rare and mostly theoretical 3 under par was called a double eagle. By the turn of the century, American innovations had managed to transform virtually every aspect of the game of golf, but the course itself had remained relatively unchanged. But that too would be revolutionized as Boston soda fountain mogul James Tufts opened Tufts Carolina Hotel in the spring of 1901. In the rolling sand hills of eastern North Carolina, Tufts had bought 5,500 acres of land with the dream of creating the nation's premier resort. The opening created a stir among the wealthy of the Northeast. Each suite had a bath, a telephone, and electric lights. It soon became known as the Queen of the South. Tufts' new hotel seemed to have it all. But when area farmers began to complain about people hitting little white balls in their pastures and scaring the cows, Tufts realized he had forgotten something.
So the story goes that Mr. Tufts decided to eliminate the problem because he couldn't convince people to quit doing it, that he would bring in Dr. Leroy Culver to come in and build the first 9 holes of golf here at Pinehurst, primarily to accommodate the complaints from the dairy people.
But 9 holes weren't enough. Pinehurst's world-class reputation needed a world-class golf course. Tufts hired Scotsman Donald Ross, who sculpted a course through the dense sandy pine barrens that came to be known as Pinehurst No. 2. It was an instant classic, with the feel of Scottish links set amidst the lush groves of towering pines. He molded the course with elevated sand greens and sloping surfaces, undulating through the natural landscape. It became the inspiration for nearly every course built since.
Now, when Donald Ross came around to doing number 2, he began to actually express himself, and with the lay of the land here, it reminded him a great deal of Scotland, and so he was able to put together a course that he felt would be advantageous to the player, as well as being interesting. They did not have the irrigating methods, they didn't have a lot of the technology that they have now, and so the courses had to be built in such a way that they could maintain themselves. And that we are finding today is a great environmental factor.
Well, you got to understand that Ross was a player, he was a green superintendent, he was a golf professional, and he was also basically an architect. So Ross's contribution was just throughout the country. If you think about it, he has golf courses from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Scottish immigrants like Patterson, Reed, and Ross had successfully transplanted the game of golf in America, making it undisputably the game of choice among America's leisure class. But golf still belonged to the British Isles. British championships, like the British Open, were held in the highest regard, even in America, and English players found the greatest fame. At the top of the heap was Harry Vardon. Vardon, who never took a lesson and made his own clubs, was England's greatest player and won 14 major tournaments, including 6 British Opens. Among the former caddy's arsenal was the overlapping grip, which became the standard for the game and was named after him. In an era before television, America's golf fans followed Vardon's every move through newspaper and magazine articles of his exploits. When the news came from across the Atlantic that Vardon was coming to America for an exhibition tour, anticipation reached a fever pitch. In 1913, Vardon came to America for the first time. He arrived as the greatest golfer in the world, but he would leave as a fallen giant. One of Vardon's matches was against a young American named Francis Ouimet. Ouimet came from the working class. He learned to play golf on a makeshift course behind his house and by sneaking on to Brookline Country Club, where he caddied. On September 20th, 1913, at the Brookline Country Club, Ouimet beat Harry Vardon by 2 strokes in a playoff at the U.S. Open. It sent shockwaves through the golfing community. An American amateur had beaten the greatest golfer in the world. Suddenly, golf belonged to America, and she would never give it back.
The fact that this young kid was able to beat the two greatest pros in the world, and he was the American was an amateur, it just started a huge interest, front page articles in newspapers and what have you.
The press's attention to Ouimet's victory further fueled America's interest in golf. President Woodrow Wilson was among the nation's golf fanatics. He played 5 or 6 times a week all year round, rarely shooting under 115. Nonetheless, he was obsessed with the game.
He played 5-6 mornings a week. He'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go out and play golf because he needed it for exercise. He wasn't any good. He was terrible. He was a congenital slicer, and he was a very bad golfer. But he did it for exercise and played an awful lot, even in the snow. He's the first reference I've seen to painted golf balls were painted red by the Secret Service and put to dry on the White House radiators so that he could get out and play in the snow.
Though Wilson was a popular president, his love of such an elite sport did not add much to its popularity, especially among the rank and file. That job would fall to a colorful and irreverent golf pro named Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen was born in Rochester, New York in 1892. He caddied as a young boy and became one of the top players in the region. Hagen developed his game and his colorful personality while working as a golf pro at the Rochester Country Club. His swing was far from a model of form or precision. Some describe it as starting with a sway and ending with a lunge. His powerful drives often left much to be desired in control. But his putting was phenomenal. Over 9 holes, he once made only 7 putts. Time and again, Hagen's erratic play was salvaged by his mastery with the putter. After carding a par, he once smirked as he strode off the green. 3 of those, and 1 of these, equal par. Outrageous and free-spirited, Hagen's exploits brought outright scorn from stuffy traditionalists.
Until Hagen came along, golf professionals were thought of as sort of second-rate characters. If they came in the clubhouse at all, it was through the servants' entrance. A lot of times they weren't even allowed in the clubhouse, and Hagen changed all that.
I think he was quite conscious of what he was doing, but I think he was also the bad boy type also. I think that it was a combination of those things. But I think that in his own mind, he felt that the golf professional deserved the position that he was kind of bad boying or thinking in his actions that he wanted to elevate them to the position that we enjoy today.
The traditionalists might have scoffed, but the public loved him. Hagen's larger-than-life character and his huge popularity gave golf a much-needed boost. In 1922, Hagen arrived in England to compete in the British Open. Back then, professional golfers were not allowed in the clubhouse. When the British refused to let him in the clubhouse at Troon, he thumbed his nose at the stuffy aristocracy and had lunch on the lawn.
Hagen would show up every day with this huge Daimler-Benz limousine. He'd have lunch, a picnic lunch on white linen tablecloths with crystal and silverware. And people had never seen, especially in England, which was such a class-bound society, had never seen anything like him. And in fact, I believe when he left Troon at the end of the tournament, he drove away throwing golf balls to the crowd, to the young children, and they loved him for it.
The one thing he didn't throw into the crowd was the trophy. He kept that for himself. He was the first American to ever win the British Open. Walter Hagen was also the first to recognize professional golf as theater, casting himself as its leading man, and carefully cultivating his bad boy image.
The great story about Hagen was, of course, that he would party all night, show up late on the first tee in a crumpled tuxedo, when the reality, a lot of times, all those drinks would wind up in the potted palms, and Hagen would go back to his room at a reasonable hour, crumple up the tuxedo and throw it in the corner, and show up the next day. It was all for effect.
And it paid off. Though he once said, "I don't want to be a millionaire, I just want to live like one." Hagen's star appeal earned him today's equivalent of $1.5 million a year. And perhaps most importantly, he paved the way for what many consider to be the era of golf's greatest stars. With the end of World War I, the Roaring '20s swept across America. The hot sound of jazz, bootleg whiskey, and speakeasies rocked with the wild exuberance of the flappers. And in the very midst of Prohibition, President Warren Harding was having his butlers serve him bootleg scotch and soda at every fourth hole at the Chevy Chase Golf Club.
Blasted a three-run homer to put New York in the lead 6-4 in the sixth inning.
Sports in America, what writer Russell Baker called the opiate of the masses, was growing enormously. With the emergence of national radio networks came national superstars like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jack Dempsey, and Knute Rockne. Walter Hagen was golf's top draw. Not only was he building grassroots appeal, he was also reshaping the image and the role of the professional golfer.
Hagen was a very flamboyant, outgoing person. I think about, showing up on the first tee in a tuxedo, about going in the clubhouse against the regulations. My father was a golf professional, and in our early days, the only thing he went in the clubhouse for was business. And Hagen kind of got the momentum going to change all of that, and I think it was a very worthwhile experience.
Despite the popularity of professionals like Walter Hagen, they were looked down upon by some. Amateurs were still thought of as the true noble golfers. And the greatest amateur golfer of all time was Bobby Jones. Unlike Walter Hagen, Bobby Jones was definitely not the common man. He had college degrees from Georgia Tech and Harvard in law, engineering, and literature. For Jones, golf was merely a hobby.
Golf was really an avocation for him. It was not his. It was not a full-time deal. I mean, he was raising a family. He was practicing law. In so many ways, he was a Renaissance man. He had many interests beyond golf.
Jones believed that golf was a gentleman's sport, a game played for honor, not money. Of course, that was easy for him to say. He had plenty. Jones was blessed with a poetic, graceful swing, what many sports writers of the day described simply as a work of art. Jones perfected this natural gift into the holy grail of golf, an accurate, repeatable swing, one that would hold up under the pressure cooker of tournament play. In 1923, the smooth-swinging Jones, using a putter he called Calamity Jane, won the U.S. Open. He followed with 2 U.S. amateur titles and won 3 British Opens.
He was treated almost like royalty and perceived as royalty. He was a gentleman. He was well educated. He was the ultimate sportsman. He's arguably the best player who ever lived. He certainly is one of the 3 or 4 best who ever lived. And he did so as an amateur.
But it was in 1930 that Bobby Jones had his greatest year. He won the British Amateur at St. Andrews, and then took the British Open. Sports writers suddenly began to believe that he might also win the U.S. Open and Amateur, which would mean all 4 of golf's biggest tournaments. In anticipation of the feat, a new term was coined, the Grand Slam of golf. After winning his 3rd major, the U.S. Open, anticipation reached a fever pitch. Fellow golfer Bobby Cruikshank bet the Vegas odds makers $500 that Jones would win all 4. The odds were 120 to 1.
The amateur from Atlanta who beat them all, and he held his breath when Bobby rammed in a 40-footer to complete his Grand Slam.
Bobby Cruikshank won $60,000 on his bet, the equivalent of at least $1 million today. One writer at a loss for words called it the impregnable quadrilateral. Jones made the cover of Time magazine and became the first man in history to receive 2 New York City ticker tape parades.
Nobody's ever done what Jones has done. I mean, the modern Grand Slam is different than Jones's Grand Slam, but it's still, the feat that he performed was phenomenal. He only played 5 golf tournaments in 1930. The ability to be able to live another life, play just 5 tournaments a year, and win all of them against the competition, maybe not the competition we have today, but still, pretty darn good competition. That's pretty phenomenal.
It is unlikely that many of those who cheered the triumphant Jones knew very much about the game, but they sensed that here was an uncommon hero. Here was a man of honor and good sportsmanship, ideals at the heart of the game of golf.
One of my favorite stories about Bob Jones, and probably the one that's most often told, is about the time he was playing in a tournament and he shot his ball into the woods, and he had to go to retrieve the ball. And he saw that he had a good shot back out to the fairway, so as he stood up to address the ball, the ball moved. Well, he was playing in a tournament, and no one was near, and no one even knew he was in the woods. But he knew, and so he penalized himself 2 strokes and ended up losing the tournament by 1 stroke. But that says a lot about what Bob Jones felt about golf. It was a game of integrity.
Months later, Bobby Jones once again shocked the sporting world by announcing that he would retire from competitive golf, walking away at the pinnacle of his incredible career. But Jones's contributions to the game were far from over. 4 years after Jones said goodbye to competitive golf, he and a partner, Cliff Roberts, announced plans for what would become one of the world's most prestigious golf tournaments, the Masters. The Masters would be played on a course Jones had personally conceived and built outside Atlanta, Georgia, the Augusta National Golf Club. Jones worked with world-renowned designer Dr. Alistair Mackenzie in creating a strategic course in harmony with nature. Mackenzie said that all artificial features should have so natural an appearance that a stranger is unable to distinguish them from nature itself. It was here in these lavish southern surroundings that Jones and Roberts offered legendary hospitality and exclusive membership by invitation only.
The first thing they decided to do was to have national members. It wasn't going to be just another country club. They were going to have men from all over the country who had a passion for golf, who would enjoy each other, and they would come to Augusta and play golf on what was to be the most beautiful course you could imagine.
Just as exclusive was the list of players invited to compete in the Masters tournament. It started slowly, but quickly gained momentum.
Well, when the Masters was founded, when the first tournament was held in 1934, there wasn't much significance at all. It was really a small, intimate golfing get-together, almost a party, put on by Bobby Jones and Clifford Roberts for some of their friends. And because of Jones's name, however, it very quickly evolved into a very prominent and important tournament.
When they were having their first organizational meeting, Grantland Rice, who was probably the premier sportscaster of the day, was there at the meeting, and they were discussing different things. And finally, Rice jumped up and he said, "I've been a member of many a club run by a committee, and none of them were worth a damn. I recommend that Cliff Roberts and Bobby Jones be in charge of this club in perpetuity." And Bobby Jones is president of the Augusta National in perpetuity.
It wasn't only Jones's good name that made the Masters a prominent tournament. In its second year, the Masters gained nearly instant worldwide fame on one shot. In the final round of the 1935 Masters tournament, Gene Sarazen was 220 yards out on the par 5 15th hole as he prepared to hit his second shot. Those watching him read like a who's who of golf. Walter Hagen, Sarazen's playing partner, told him to hurry up. He had a date. Bobby Jones was watching from the green. Byron Nelson, on an adjacent fairway, stopped to watch. The stocky Sarazen pulled out a 4-wood and smashed his second shot. The crowd gasped as the ball soared over 200 yards, bounced straight towards the pin, rolled across the green, and into the cup. The so-called shot heard around the world won the tournament for Sarazen and worldwide fame for the Masters.
He put the Masters on the map. Sarazen's important. He was the first man to win all 4 of the professional majors. First man ever to do that, and I think only five have done it in all. And when Tiger Woods emerged and won the Masters, somebody asked Sarazen what they thought about him. He said, well, of course, he's a beautiful player, and he's won the Masters, he said. But of course, when I was his age, I had already won the Open and the PGA.
As the 1930s wound down and the 40s began, America's passion for sports took a backseat to European troubles which had erupted in World War II. The Masters was canceled in 1943, 44, and 45, as was the U.S. Open and the British Open. The world had more serious things on its mind than golf. But the end of the war would usher in a truly golden era in golf, with 3 of the greatest players of all time battling for world supremacy. As World War II raged in Europe and the Pacific, golf, like most sports, took a backseat to winning the war. Like many athletes and celebrities, professional golfers were involved in the war effort on several fronts. Among them were 3 of the greatest golfers of all time: Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Sam Snead. Both Hogan and Snead left golf to serve in the military. Byron Nelson, who was a hemophiliac and classified as 4F, played in special tournaments with celebrities like Bing Crosby and Douglas Fairbanks, and helped raise more than $1 million for the war effort. All three would gain tremendous fame worldwide after the war. In one of sport's greatest coincidences, Nelson, Hogan, and Snead were all born the same year, 1912, but they came from very different backgrounds. Hogan's working-class childhood was cut short at the age of 9 when his father committed suicide, leaving the family destitute. At the age of 12, he took a job as a caddy at the Glen Garden Country Club in Fort Worth to help support his family. Among his fellow caddies was Byron Nelson. Nelson came from a stable blue-collar family, but both shared a common bond, a love of golf and a burning desire to be the best.
Byron and Ben grew up caddying at the same club in Texas. Byron made the game look easy. Byron was a success at every level he played. Ben Hogan came along. He had a hook, which he had to learn to beat. He didn't have Nelson's size. He didn't have Nelson's strength. But what he did have was this tenacity, this will to succeed.
Some 1,500 miles away in rural Hot Springs, Virginia, 13-year-old Sam Snead was hand-carving golf clubs and hustling some of the local boys.
I went on the steepest ridge down here and find a swamp maple, they call it. And you cut it off, it comes out and then it comes straight up. Well, you have it already made for you. All you do is cut it off and then take your hatchet or axe and trim it down where you get the loft. You'd be surprised how far you could hit it with that thing.
While Nelson and Hogan had plenty of opportunities to learn the game as caddies, Sam Snead was self-taught.
Golf is rhythm and timing. I like music. That's what it is. It's rhythm and timing and soft hands.
Lesson or no, when Snead turned pro in 1934, there was no doubt he was destined for greatness.
No one made the game look easier than Sam. He was the whole package. Power, touch, could hit the ball high, bring it in low, left to right, right to left. I've often thought that for every person who believed that they played the game like Arnold Palmer, there were 100 people who believed that their swing looked like Sam's.
Sam Snead's swing today, Sam is, 85 or 6 years old, whatever Sam is. He still takes the club back parallel with great ease. He was a phenomenal athlete.
When Snead and Hogan returned from the war, they found a white-hot Byron Nelson awaiting. In 1945, he set the golfing world on fire with 18 tournament wins, including 11 in a row, with record low scores.
Lord Byron takes extra care and sinks this one to win the match. With this win, Nelson now has won 9 tournaments in a row. The greatest golfer in the world today, Byron Nelson.
As Nelson was winning tournaments, he was also perfecting what would become the epitome of the modern golf swing. Perfectly suited for the now metal-shafted golf clubs, Nelson's straight left arm and flexible left knee allowed him to use his legs for maximum power.
He was maybe the first player who dramatically changed his swing in response to the change in equipment, because he developed a swing in the mid-1930s in response to the steel shaft. That swing would not have been effective with hickory shafts.
We always use the phrase that Byron was so accurate, that he'd hit the caddy with the golf shot, and he said before he could get up, he'd hit him twice again. He's always amazed me with his accuracy, and the swing plane stayed on the line for so long.
A beautiful ball striker, a phenomenal gentleman, but you couldn't let this grace and this incredible kindness and sweetness about the man mask the fact that he was a ferocious competitor.
In 1946, Nelson, like his hero Bobby Jones, gave up the game at the height of his career. Plagued by years of travel and tension, Nelson simply said, "I couldn't get the game out of my mind."
His whole purpose of playing golf was nearly all he ever aspired to do was to make enough money to buy a ranch and retire and live an easy life back in Texas.
With Nelson out of the way, Snead and Hogan would fiercely battle it out on the world's links. In 1946, Snead won the British Open and 5 other tournaments. Hogan won the PGA and 12 other tournaments. He was also runner-up at the Masters. Snead's natural rhythm and smooth swing made winning look easy. But for Ben Hogan, nothing came easy.
Ben Hogan was golf in so many ways. He He dug it out of the ground. He did it the hard way. His legacy, I think, is will always be with us. It'll always be felt. It'll never change. Ben Hogan was the first great practicer of the game. He would practice as a young man. He would practice till his hands bled. Then he would soak them in salt water, and then he would practice some more. And Hogan said, if you practice until those calluses reach the bone, there won't be any room for blisters.
Hogan was a loner, never talked. He didn't say anything. He never said good shot, blah, 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 blah. Never said anything. He said, I have to keep my mind on what I'm doing. I'm trying to put the ball from A to B. Ben was sort of like a brother to me. Off the course, he was jolly and just regular old Ben.
But in 1949, disaster struck Hogan. As Hogan and his wife Valerie drove home from dinner on a fog-shrouded highway, a bus emerged from the mist and crashed head-on into their car. Hogan threw himself across his wife to protect her. His back was broken in 2 places. His ribs, ankle, and collarbone all broken. The hospital was 150 miles away. Hogan had saved his wife's life, but his was in grave danger.
The only reason he survived at all is that he instinctively threw himself across the front seat to protect Valerie. The steering column shot back through and pinned the back of the front seat, so he would have been impaled. He would have been killed instantly. No one expected he would play golf again. A lot of people didn't expect him to be able to walk again.
But Ben Hogan did walk again, and he played golf again. In 1950, Hogan tested his recovery by entering the Los Angeles Open. He lost to Sam Snead in the playoff, but had clearly won the battle over his injuries.
I beat him in a playoff for the LA Open, and I won 11 out of 24 tournaments. And he won 1 tournament, got Golf of the Year.
Here's Ben Hogan, the sentimental favorite for his dramatic comeback victory last year.
In the summer of 1950, with his legs still bandaged, Hogan entered the U.S. Open at Marion near Philadelphia. 5 strokes back after 2 rounds, he fought just to survive the final 36 holes. With 18 holes left, he was 2 shots behind the leader, Lloyd Mangrum. By the 18th hole, the pain was so great that Hogan could not even pick the ball out of the cup. But he had drawn even and forced a playoff, and Ben Hogan didn't come this far to end up runner-up. He won the playoff, earning not only the incredible cheers of the crowd, but the admiration of every player on tour, and that of people who did not know a thing about golf, but understood courage.
And players admired Hogan because they could look at him and say, if Ben can make it, I can make it. You know, they could look at Sam Snead and say, I'll never have that swing, but if I work the way Ben Hogan worked, then I can win. And that's why Hogan's life is important.
But while Hogan was winning the hearts and sympathies of the American public, Sam Snead was out winning golf tournaments. In a 5-year period between 1949 and 1954, Snead won the Masters 3 times and the PGA title twice. The one tournament that continued to elude Sam Snead was the U.S. Open.
And Snead still seeking the one big title he hasn't won.
He'd come close to winning it in 1947, when he tied Lou Worsham in regulation, but he lost in the playoff. He never came that close again, and never won it.
He never won the tournament that he wanted to win most, the U.S. Open. Fate always seemed to intervene. He came so close so many times.
But Snead won plenty of other tournaments, more in fact than anyone in history. Sam Snead played for 6 decades, during which he racked up 81 PGA Tour wins and 135 wins worldwide.
If you took the best 3 players today, I don't think they would beat the best 3 players of 50 years ago, being namely Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, and Byron Nelson. I really believe those 3 would beat the best 3 today.
I tried to do my best. I played right to the line. I expect everybody else to do the same.
Ben Crenshaw said about him one time, Sam hits every ball the way you'd pray to hit just one once in your life. Peter Thompson, the 5-time Open champion, said Sam is like the great symphonies. He'll stay with us forever.
Snead's remarkable feats on the course weren't the only reason for his enduring popularity. For Sam Snead, the growing popularity of television came at an ideal time. His big personality and infectious laugh endeared him to press and fans alike.
Sam loved to do interviews, where Hogan and Nelson, who were his rivals and his great contemporaries, were essentially shy men, especially Hogan, who could almost border on reclusive. Sam loved to go talk to the press. Sam loved to do exhibitions. He traveled the country. And that had a profound effect on the growth of the game.
Even the nation's commander-in-chief could not resist Snead's charm. Among his biggest fans was President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
I'm standing back in the people and said, Mr. President, there's Sam Snead. Where? Oh, there. He went right through the people and said, Sam, we're going to play golf? And I said, yes, sir, if you say so. When? 15 minutes? I said, yes, sir. He was down here in 15 minutes. He was here.
Eisenhower was perhaps the most fanatic in a long line of presidential golfers, leaving spike marks in the Oval Office from walking to the practice green he had built on the White House lawn.
Someone finally established that Eisenhower played 800 rounds of golf during his 2 terms in the White House. And when confronted with this, he said he wished it could have been more.
The incredible play and enduring personalities of Hogan, Snead, and Nelson paved the way for the next great era of golf, a time when 2 giants of the game would go head-to-head, with all the world watching. By the 1950s, nearly 100 years since it came to America, golf had come a long way. Once crude hand-carved clubs were now mass-produced. The new rubber-wound balls could be hit further and with more accuracy than ever before. Stars like Nelson, Hogan, and Snead became household names, and in the process, golf became one of the country's most popular sports. The mid-century saw a gradual change in the sport as well. One no longer had to be a Rockefeller or an Astor to enjoy the country club life. But by and large, one still had to be rich, white, and male. But that too was changing, especially for women. The emergence of women's golf is a story unto itself. But no look at the history of golf would be complete without the incredible story of Babe Zaharias. Long before she ever picked up a golf club, the world knew Mildred Dietrichson Zaharias simply as Babe, a nickname she got for hitting home runs like her childhood hero, Babe Ruth. The outgoing, tenacious, and sometimes outrageous girl from Beaumont, Texas, had won national recognition in the 1920s. In the National Track and Field Championships, Babe won 6 events, setting 3 world records. She won the team competition, even though she competed alone. In the 1932 Olympics, Babe won gold medals in both the hurdles and the javelin, setting Olympic records. Asked if there was any sport that she had not tried, Babe answered, yeah, dolls. Golf became her next sport, and Babe was simply sensational. She had tremendous natural power, but she still took lessons from one of golf's all-time great coaches, Tommy Armour. And like Ben Hogan, she practiced until her hands bled in order to become the best.
Her opposition played better than women have ever played in tournaments before. The experts got to masterminding the things like the law of averages. They said that Babe Zaharias couldn't win every match, that she had to miss some time, that she had to have an off day, while her opponents played only in the hope that if they could keep on playing steadily and well, the Babe's skill might desert her. But it never did.
Babe Zaharias was great for golf because she was already the most dominant, prominent women's athlete probably in the world by the time she even took up golf. She was a fantastic athlete, great strength, great competitive instincts. She really put the LPGA on the map.
In 1946 and 47, Babe won 17 straight championships. She was the first American woman in history to win the British Amateur, both delighting and confounding the Brits with her antics on the course. When I won a bust one, she told the crowd, I just loosened up my girdle and let her fly. When asked if she really did wear a girdle on the course, she said, hell no, I'm not a sissy. She would flip cigarettes and catch them in her mouth. She'd set a match behind her ball and light it with a driver. Anything to please the crowd.
She was such a braggart. I hate to say that, but she was. She bragged about herself all the time. She was so good at publicizing herself. But her friends said, well, that's just Babe. And she did draw an awful lot of attention to women's basketball, women's track and field, and then women's golf. She was responsible for a lot of the galleries that came out because she always put on a show.
In 1948, Babe turned pro, signed a $300,000 contract to make golf films, and won the U.S. Open. When she publicly threatened to enter the Men's Open, the USGA changed the rule the next day, prohibiting women. Frustrated with the plight of women professionals, Babe and 6 other women, including Patty Berg and Helen Detweiler, formed the LPGA, the Ladies Professional Golf Association.
they got together and started organizing tournaments for women to play in, getting the purses. They were very small at first, $1,500 total purse, $2,500 total purse. But at least the players could go out and make a living. And it was very easy to become a professional at that time, because if you were just walking around as a good amateur, Babe would say, why don't you turn pro and join us? And the players would say, well, how do I do that? And Babe said, you're a pro.
Despite her success, Babe Dietrichson made only $3,400 on the tour, but the colorful champion earned another $100,000 in endorsements and exhibitions, putting her in the financial league of baseball superstar Ted Williams. Babe's incredible achievements and the formation of the LPGA in 1950 ushered in the new decade for golf, one in which women, movie stars, and a new medium called television would change the game forever. In 1951, the first coast-to-coast telecast was broadcast from San Francisco. Just 5 years earlier, there were less than 10,000 sets in the United States. By 1950, that number was 6 million. In the summer of 1954, the U.S. Open was broadcast nationally for the first time. Golf soon became a television staple, and once again, its popularity soared. Not only was golf a big hit on the small screen, it was also being glamorized by the stars of the big screen. Both Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were top-notch golfers. Crosby, a two-handicap player, loved the game so much that he created the world's first Pro-Am tournament, pairing movie stars with professional golfers like Nelson, Hogan, and Snead. The setting for Crosby's tournament was one of the most spectacular golf courses in the world, Pebble Beach. The course ran along the dramatic California coastline near Monterey and Big Sur and attracted the rich and famous from the beginning.
The Monterey Peninsula is a very unique environment. It is coastal woodlands and mountains coming right up from the ocean. The Monterey Peninsula is about a 6 square mile piece of real estate that juts out into the Pacific Ocean. Basically, this is a jagged, rocky coastal beach creating beautiful scenic vistas.
But it wasn't just scenery that made the tournament so popular. Bing Crosby bestowed worldwide fame on the course when he brought his glamorous tournament, and with it, Hollywood and sporting superstars, to the spectacular vista of Pebble Beach.
The Crosby Golf Tournament, as it was originally called, came to the Monterey Peninsula in 1947. The Crosby and the AT&T that followed have always brought in some very funny people, whether it was Phil Harris and Bob Hope or Tommy Smothers and Bill Murray. The humor that you can have with a game, I think, adds to the flavor, and it certainly has added to the wonderful flavor of the Pro-Am here at Pebble Beach. The Crosby was actually the first tournament broadcast on national television. It really had a strong impact on how golf was perceived by the public.
By 1960, both golf and television were permanent parts of American culture. Yet golf's reputation as a rich man's game was still intact. So much so that when John F. Kennedy was elected president, he hid the fact that he was an avid golfer. Another golfer in the White House playing the rich man's game is not what Kennedy wanted people saying. Despite the fact that Kennedy was much richer and a much better golfer than Eisenhower, he was acutely aware that Ike's love of the game was a political liability.
Kennedy tried to hide from the public the fact that he was playing this because he didn't want to be too much like Eisenhower. The Democrats had made a big deal about Eisenhower spending too much time on the golf course and not enough time governing, and this was a big thing, so they would try to put down the whole game of golf.
Though Kennedy may have kept his golfing hidden from the public, he hardly gave it up. Golf had always provided an escape for the rich and the powerful, and Kennedy was no exception.
After the disaster of the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy the next day went out driving golf balls with an associate, and he just stood there driving one ball after another into an empty field saying, "How could I have done it? How could I have done it?"
Concerned that his game might suffer during his term as president, in 1963 he turned to White House photographer Cecil Stoughton and a rising young pro named Arnold Palmer for help.
He said, we'll get somebody, some professional like Arnold Palmer will probably come and look at these films and give me an idea of what I'm doing wrong. And after each swing, then the president would, while I was still focused on him, he would give me a hand signal, and I would either go right or left, or if it was good, he'd give me the old okay.
Unfortunately, the film never made it to Arnold Palmer and has been rarely seen since. Though Arnold Palmer never got the chance to help Kennedy, he did help increase the popularity of golf tremendously, especially among the growing middle class.
The everyday golfer, the everyman could look at Palmer and they could identify with him. His technique was a flailing, raw. His method certainly wasn't slick. He lashed at the ball. There was an aggressive nature in his play. He hit the ball. He didn't swing daintily through it, and people identified with that.
The son of a golf pro in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, Palmer won his first of 4 Masters in 1958. His clean-cut good looks and highly emotional style made him an instant TV star.
He just came across on that little tube as just a guy who you'd want to have a beer with, and you just would pull for him, and he had this dashing style.
Television coverage made a tremendous difference. Palmer played to the crowds. He was very charismatic. He knew how to get the coverage. He was a sexy guy, and the crowd loved him.
Fueled by the exploding television coverage, huge crowds started following Palmer wherever he played. No matter who else was on the course, Palmer was a player everyone wanted to watch. Sports writer Johnny Hendricks of the Augusta Chronicle labeled Palmer's throng of fans Arnie's Army.
When his gallery swelled, you brought people into the game who didn't understand the game, they just loved Arnold. And it was a real sporting mentality. It was like the Red Sox playing the Yankees.
I liked the galleries, I liked the people, and it motivated me to want to perform and perform well.
2 years after winning his first Masters, Palmer won another one. And that same year, he won the U.S. Open.
Palmer was what you called a very dangerous player. Arnold Palmer won 63 golf tournaments and probably lost 63 because he was very aggressive. When Arnold Palmer's name jumped on the board and you had 5 or 6 holes to go and old Joe had you around the throat, man, and you couldn't breathe real well, you see those guys pulling on those shirts? Those shirts are not tight on their body. They're trying to get some more oxygen.
He would walk out, when he came onto the first tee, it was like a prize fighter entering the ring. And then he'd stand there and he'd look into the gallery and catch your eye and made you feel like you were the most important person in the world right there. He was really a people's player in the sense that people who never cared particularly about golf or would never think about coming to a tournament, all of a sudden would flock to tournaments.
Among his earliest admirers was a young kid from Ohio named Jack Nicklaus.
I saw Arnold at Sylvania Country Club in Toledo, Ohio, and I was 14 at the time, and Arnold was defending the Ohio Amateur Champion. I remember coming in on an afternoon, there was one person on the practice range. It was pouring down rain, and I was the only person on the golf course. And I came in, and there was this guy hitting balls on the practice range, and I saw him, and he looked so strong. And he just kept beating this ball and knocking it. It looked like he was in a short iron, but he wasn't hitting it 10, 15 feet off the ground. And I sat down behind there in the rain with my umbrella and just watched. And I watched him for about a half an hour, and I got back to the club. I says, "Who's the fella out there on the driving range hitting golf balls?" I says, "Boy, is he strong." I says, "Oh," he says, "that's the defending champion." He says, "If he's in the Coast Guard, phone him Arnold Palmer." Oh, okay.
Jack Nicklaus had begun his career in Columbus, Ohio, caddying for his father. He went on to play at Ohio State and won his first U.S. amateur title in 1959 when he was only 19. By the early 60s, the competition between Palmer and Nicklaus had become one of the fiercest rivalries in American sports.
Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, having grown up with them, have always, in the back of my mind, been my heroes because they behaved so well and have been great ambassadors, not for the United States, but for the world.
There was no question about the fact that Jack could hit the golf ball. He was a hard-hitting, deep-thinking, very dedicated golfer. But I didn't think of him in those early days as someone that I was going to compete with.
Though the two players had a great respect for one another, Arnie's Army resented the upstart who threatened to take the title from their hero. They sometimes shouted rudely as the young Nicklaus began to swing and taunted the hefty, crew-cut Nicklaus with chants of, "Over here, fat boy."
I had blinders on. I wouldn't have a clue what was out around. I never did really hear the gallery. I was really interested in my focus, so I never heard him.
It was a sad thing, I think, for Nicklaus at that point. No one knew he was going to be the greatest player in the history of the game at that point.
You would never think of yelling, "Miss it," as Nicklaus stood over a putt, but people would do that.
The fact that I was at home, in my hometown, with all my friends and people, I thought it was a bad performance on behalf of the gallery. Again, that's part of when we talk about etiquette and integrity and fan support. That isn't needed in the game of golf. I think that that is something that we could have well avoided. But Jack has overcome that, and it's now, well, even a few years after, it's a clean competition, it's a good competition, and it's lasted a long time.
The dramatic television coverage of these two golfing giants in the 1960s caused an explosion in the popularity of the game.
When television came along, it had a tremendous impact on the game. It made people of all walks of life aware of the game, and of course is bringing, and still bringing, consistently, people into the game.
In the 1962 U.S. Open, television cameras captured the high drama of a head-to-head competition at Oakmont. The 22-year-old Nicklaus, who had never won a PGA tournament, played Palmer stroke for stroke. They finished the course tied in regulation. The playoff that followed provided the nation with one of the most exciting one-on-one competitions in the history of golf. In the 18-hole playoff, Nicklaus was unyielding as he continued his relentless game of power and precision, shooting a 1-under par 71. Palmer, playing before a hometown crowd, seemed to struggle. Arnie's Army cheered him on, hoping for a last-minute charge on the final holes, but it never came. Palmer finished 3 strokes behind his young opponent. The Golden Bear, as Nicklaus came to be called, won $17,500 in that playoff and went on to become the premier golfer of the modern era.
No one has approached his record in the majors. You know, Jack has won 20 majors. No one has come remotely close to that. And he not only won that many majors, he took second 21 or 22 times. The greater the pressure, the better Nicklaus performed. When it comes to winning golf tournaments, Jack Nicklaus is, and very possibly always will be, the greatest golfer of all time.
In 1963, Nicklaus achieved a lifelong dream. He won the Masters, with his boyhood hero, Bobby Jones, looking on.
We got to the 18th hole, and I'm colorblind. I got to the 18th green, I looked up at the scoreboard, and I saw my caddy, and there were about 6 or 7 ones on the board, and I said, Willie, I said, how many of those ones are red? He says, just you, boss. And that's the first time I realized I was actually leading the golf tournament. I had about a 4-foot putt at the last hole to win and knocked it in. It's just, yeah, it was obviously a dream come true.
Jack Nicklaus has been a great influence on the game of golf. His ability, his efforts to play and play as well as he has over the years, I don't think anyone will ever win and accomplish as much as Jack Nicklaus has accomplished with his game of golf. The majors he's won, and the ability to concentrate and to do as well as he has done is fantastic.
Though Palmer and Nicklaus dominated the sport in TV coverage, other great players and personalities soon came into the game. South African Gary Player became one of the first international stars to play consistently on the U.S. Tour. Texan Lee Torino brought new excitement and personality to the game, molded not in country clubs, but in the Mexican-American barrios of West Texas.
I never thought I was good enough to play. I think that's one of the reasons that I worked so hard. Hogan at that time when I was playing a little golf was winning U.S. Opens, and Snead and Mangrum, and I had no idea who those people were. Had no idea who they were.
Television created more than stars. It created millionaires. Almost overnight, it seemed, players were competing not for thousands of dollars, but for millions of dollars. A sport once ranked by tournaments won was now ranked by money won.
Arnold Palmer and I, on occasions, never played for $1 million in a year. And it's very sad that people would even consider looking at money lists and judging golfers. I mean, a man like Ben Hogan and Sam Snead, people make more money today in one tournament than they made in their lives, so to speak. So money's no criteria to judge golfers. Winning is the criteria.
Television changed the game of golf permanently. It transformed journeyman golf pros into international superstars. And it brought a game once confined to private country clubs into the living rooms of everyday Americans. The popularity of golf was poised to explode. On February 9, 1971, astronaut Alan Shepard snuck some golf balls and a 6-iron onto Apollo 14. Over 100 years after the first golf ball was hit in America, Shepard hit the first ball on the moon. The space age would have a lot to do with another surge in the popularity of golf. By the 1980s, space age materials like titanium and graphite began to replace steel and wood in golf clubs. The new clubs enabled the average golfer to hit the long drive and control the ball like the pros, or at least more like the pros than ever before.
All the technology now is coming into everything. I mean, the clubs are built from a material. We had nothing but persimmon woods and a lot of things that are gone. I mean, they aren't even part of the industry anymore.
Today, technology drives the $6 billion golf equipment and apparel industry. At the annual PGA show in Orlando, Florida, hundreds of vendors show up to pitch the latest and greatest technological advances. From titanium drivers to robotic carts and virtual reality indoor courses, golf technology has experienced explosive growth as the sport moves into the new millennium. There must be something more that explains golf's incredible appeal. After all, over 24 million Americans play golf, or nearly 16,000 courses, and nearly 50 million tee it up worldwide. And the people playing golf no longer all look the same like they once did. Two of the fastest growing segments of new golfers are kids and minorities. Once the last bastion of upper-class white exclusivity, golf has gradually and finally opened up to everyone. One of the watershed moments in that transformation came in 1975, when Lee Elder became the first black player in history to play in the Masters. It was a turning point after years of bitter segregation throughout the Deep South.
Man, I tell you, it was right now that I stop and think about it, how frightening it were, and how many times that I have been threatened with, nigga, you have no business playing here, nigga, I'm gonna shoot you, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. You know, it just gets so tiresome that you just want to give up. But I knew that if I gave up, that it was certainly not going to help the situation for other young minorities that was coming behind me.
Lee Elder was in the gallery at Augusta over 20 years later when in 1997, Tiger Woods became the first black golfer to win the Masters.
I want to be there to be a part of history because I had said that in not distant future that a minority would come along and would tame Augusta and would win at Augusta. I didn't think it would be that soon, I really did.
The prize money was over $2 million, and Woods earned 10 times that touring and through endorsement contracts. The total purse on the combined PGA, LPGA, and senior tours is now worth over $100 million.
Everything has changed. The equipment has made golf so much easier. The great greens and great fairways and great tees, and guys having their own jets. And for me, I used to travel over here with 6 children, 45 hours in an airplane, no jets, and no disposable diapers, and 33 pieces of baggage, and 3 bedrooms, and 3 taxis. Had to win to break even.
Hale Irvin last year won 9 tournaments, won $2.5 million. In 1950, I won 11 tournaments and didn't make $50,000. Now, can you see what has happened to golf?
So what is it about the game of golf that has enabled it to grow from the afternoon diversion of a few Scottish shepherds to a multi-billion-dollar industry played by millions and millions of people every week all over the world?